My boss whispered, "This door stays locked." I smiled and said, "Then keep me inside." The office was silent, save for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. It was well past the usual workday, but the world outside no longer seemed to matter. Papers lay scattered across my desk, the glow of my computer screen casting soft shadows across the room. And then, the sound I had begun to anticipate, a soft click of heels against the polished floor. She was here. My boss. My mentor. The woman who carried herself with quiet authority, yet in the small hours like this, revealed glimpses of something softer, something human beneath her professional exterior. I noticed her before she spoke, the way her presence seemed to fill the room without a word. She moved toward her office, slipping the key into the lock, and when she looked at me, her gaze was steady, almost teasing. Then, in a voice so low I could barely hear it over the hum of the air conditioner, she whispered, "This door stays locked." It wasn't a command, exactly, nor a threat. There was something intimate about it, as though she was sharing a secret meant only for me. My heart thumped, not from fear, but from a strange, unexpected anticipation. I caught a faint scent of her perfume, floral and soft, lingering in the air even after she sat down behind her desk. I realized I had been waiting for this moment, though I hadn't known it. I shifted in my chair, careful not to let my movement betray the sudden rush of heat in my chest. My fingers brushed against a stack of papers, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like even the smallest touch could carry meaning. The room seemed smaller somehow, cozier, almost protective. Her eyes met mine again, and there was a quiet understanding there, an unspoken acknowledgement that in this locked space, everything outside could wait. As she settled into her chair, I found myself studying the details I never noticed before, the way her hair fell just past her shoulders, the gentle rise and fall of her chest with each calm breath, the subtle curve of her smile when she thought I wasn't looking. That whisper, that locked door, became a portal into a world apart from deadlines and emails, a private space where the tension between us was palpable but unspoken. I didn't reply, not yet. Instead, I let the silence linger, letting the weight of the moment press against us in the still air. And in that quiet, I realized something unsettling and exhilarating. Being here, in this locked office, with her, felt like stepping into a story I didn't want to end. The world outside could wait. The door was locked, yes, but for the first time, I wasn't thinking about getting out. The office had become a world of its own, existing between the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft tick of the wall clock. We worked side by side, papers and files forming a tentative barrier between us, yet the air seemed charged with a tension that neither of us could, or wanted to, ignore. I noticed how she moved with deliberate grace, her hands brushing over stacks of documents, how the faint rustle of her clothes seemed louder in the quiet. She leaned over my desk to point out a correction, and I caught the subtle scent of her perfume again, a delicate mixture of jasmine and something warmer, something uniquely her. Her proximity was intoxicating. Our fingers brushed as she handed me a folder. It was fleeting, almost accidental, yet it sent a subtle thrill through me, the kind that makes your chest tighten and your pulse race without any words being spoken. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She simply lingered a moment longer than necessary, her eyes meeting mine, sharp but not unkind, holding a spark of something unspoken. I found myself watching the small, intimate gestures I would have once ignored, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gentle sigh as she leaned back in her chair, the quiet way she tapped her pen against the desk when thinking. There was a rhythm to her presence, a cadence I was becoming attuned to. Every movement felt loaded with significance, every pause heavy with the weight of things we couldn't, or wouldn't, say aloud. Even as we kept our conversation strictly professional, the distance between us became a paradox. We were close yet distant, connected by fleeting touches and lingering glances, yet separated by roles, rules, and unspoken caution. The room, locked and quiet, felt like a space outside time, a small sanctuary where the world and its expectations couldn't reach us. I noticed my own reactions, the quickened pulse, the way my hands fidgeted over my keyboard, the subtle warmth that rose whenever she looked my way. I began to realize that the tension wasn't just in her restraint, but in my own awareness of how deeply her presence affected me. It was electric, yet tender, thrilling, yet careful. By the time the clock signaled the end of the evening, there was a weight lingering between us, heavier than any spoken word. She returned to her office, closing the door gently behind her. And I, still at my desk, understood that in this locked room, the real work wasn't just in finishing tasks, it was in navigating the delicate, almost imperceptible dance of proximity and restraint. The quiet nearness was a promise and a question all at once, and I couldn't help but want more. It had become routine, yet every evening carried a subtle thrill I couldn't ignore. Papers, spreadsheets, and deadlines had always defined our work, but something unspoken lingered in the spaces between us. That night, I hesitated before speaking, aware of the delicate balance, the line between curiosity and intrusion. Finally, I asked the question that had been lingering in my mind: why do you always insist on the door being locked? Her response was a half-smile, a quiet pause before words: some things aren't meant for wandering eyes. The ambiguity hung between us. Did she mean the work, the office, or something else entirely? Her gaze flicked up, catching mine for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. There was a warmth there, subtle and fleeting, but it felt like the first crack in the armor she had carefully built around herself. When she leaned over my desk to show me a correction, the air seemed heavier, charged with a delicate tension. I noticed the brush of her fingers against mine as she handed me a pen. It wasn't intentional, not overt, yet the impact was unmistakable. My pulse skipped a beat. For a moment, the professional boundary blurred, replaced by a quiet, unspoken awareness of her nearness. She didn't pull back, not fully. Instead, she allowed the moment to linger, as though testing the waters herself. Her lips parted slightly, her expression softening just enough for me to catch the vulnerability she often kept hidden behind her confident exterior. There was a hesitation in her eyes, a pause that spoke volumes, a question without words, a tentative invitation. I realized, in that suspended moment, that her insistence on the locked door wasn't just about privacy, it was about control, about choosing when and with whom she allowed herself to be seen. And tonight, she had allowed herself a glimpse of something more. I felt the weight of that choice pressing gently against us. The room seemed smaller, more intimate. The papers, the office equipment, even the faint hum of the air conditioner, all receded into the background. All that mattered was the closeness, the fleeting touch, the shared understanding that something deeper was stirring. As she straightened and returned to her chair, there was a quiet tension in the air, palpable yet unspoken. I knew the dynamic between us had shifted ever so slightly. That night, I left the office feeling a mix of exhilaration and caution. The locked door had revealed a vulnerability she rarely allowed, and in that silence, I understood that we were stepping into a territory delicate, fragile, and utterly compelling. The story between us was beginning to unfold, one careful glance, one subtle brush of fingers at a time. That evening, the office felt different. The usual hum of computers and faint whir of the air conditioner were still there, but the space between us seemed charged with an unspoken question. She had always maintained a calm, almost untouchable presence, but tonight, there was a subtle tension in her posture, a hesitation I hadn't noticed before. We had been reviewing a set of reports for hours, silence filling the pauses between the clicks of our pens. Finally, she leaned back in her chair, fingers lightly intertwined, and let out a sigh I recognized as more than exhaustion. It was quiet resignation. Her eyes, normally so guarded, softened, and I caught a flicker of something deeper, a hint of the loneliness she carried beneath her composed exterior. "I don't let people close," she said, voice low, almost hesitant. "It complicates things." The words were simple, but they carried a weight I hadn't anticipated. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I leaned back slightly in my chair, letting the space feel safe, giving her the freedom to speak without pressure. She looked at me, really looked, and I saw the vulnerability she had carefully hidden from the world. Her eyes, usually so precise and controlled, shimmered with the faintest uncertainty. It was a side of her I hadn't been allowed to see before, and it stirred something protective in me. I wanted to reach out, to let her know that she could trust me without fear of judgment. I'm not used to this, she admitted, a quiet tremor in her voice. People either misinterpret or retreat. And sometimes I just get tired of holding it all in. Her hands rested lightly on the desk, fingers brushing against mine ever so slightly. That brief touch, delicate and fleeting, felt more intimate than anything spoken. I finally spoke, keeping my voice calm, gentle. You don't have to explain everything. Not to me. Just, be yourself. My words seemed to hang in the air, and I watched her relax fractionally, the tension in her shoulders easing. She allowed herself to lean slightly closer, as if acknowledging, without saying it aloud, that she trusted me to stay. In that quiet, locked office, the world outside ceased to exist. The door, once a symbol of secrecy and control, had transformed into a safe space, a place where she could let her guard down, even just a little. And for the first time, I realized that the real connection between us wasn't built on words or professional boundaries, it was built on presence, trust, and the fragile courage to reveal a hidden part of oneself. The night ended without dramatic declarations, but the shift was undeniable. The locked door wasn't just a physical barrier anymore, it was a sanctuary. And in that small, guarded space, something delicate and compelling began to grow between us, a quiet promise that this story, whatever it became, was just beginning. The rain had begun tapping softly against the windows, each drop a quiet percussion that made the office feel even more insulated from the world outside. The room smelled faintly of coffee and paper, but beneath it all lingered the subtle, familiar scent of her perfume, something warm, floral, yet grounding, like a memory I didn't want to forget. That night, the work was almost secondary, the real gravity of the evening was in the small, delicate exchanges between us. She reached over to adjust my collar, a gesture that should have been purely practical, yet carried an unspoken intimacy. Her fingers hesitated, brushing lightly against the nape of my neck. The warmth of her touch lingered far longer than necessary, and I felt a sudden, undeniable awareness of how close she was. My pulse quickened, my chest tightening in a way that was thrilling yet gentle, like standing at the edge of a quiet, deep river. Her eyes met mine, catching a flicker of recognition, as if she, too, understood the significance of that fleeting connection. There was no need for words, the room itself seemed to hold its breath. I noticed how the light from her desk lamp glinted off her hair, how the subtle curve of her smile softened the sternness that usually defined her presence. She pulled her hand back slowly, but the memory of it, the warmth, the weight, the hesitation, remained, leaving an echo I couldn't ignore. I found myself leaning a little closer, not consciously, but instinctively. The air between us was charged, yet gentle. We spoke in soft tones, our conversation dipping into mundane office matters, yet every pause was heavy with unsaid possibilities. She laughed softly at something I said, and the sound was warm, resonant, almost intimate. My fingers brushed against the papers she was holding, an almost imperceptible touch, and for a brief instant, it felt as if our space had narrowed, becoming a room defined not by walls, but by presence. Finally, as she gathered her things, she whispered, almost shyly, "Good night." The word carried a weight far greater than the casual farewell it seemed to be. I felt the gravity in her tone, the softness behind her eyes, the unspoken acknowledgement of a connection that neither of us could, or wanted to, name yet. The door clicked shut behind her, and I sat in the lingering quiet, aware of the absence her leaving created. That touch, brief and almost accidental, had left its imprint, an invisible thread connecting us in a way that neither distance nor decorum could sever. The locked office had become a vessel for something far more compelling than work, a subtle, growing intimacy, delicate yet undeniable, that hinted at the depth of what could be, if only we allowed ourselves to feel it. The rain had grown heavier, tapping insistently against the windows, creating a private rhythm that seemed to isolate the office from the rest of the world. The fluorescent lights above cast a soft glow, but the shadows in the room felt warmer, more intimate. That night, for the first time, she didn't stay across the desk. Instead, she settled into the chair beside me, her presence immediately compressing the space between us. It was subtle at first, a brush of shoulders as we reached for the same document, a quiet shared laugh at a minor oversight, but the effect was electric. The room, once filled with professional distance, felt smaller, cozier, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to witness what was unfolding. Our conversation drifted from work to life beyond the office, regrets, fleeting joys, the quiet loneliness that accompanies responsibility and experience. As she spoke, I noticed her hands resting near mine, not touching, but close enough that every shift, every subtle movement, sent tiny currents of awareness through me. Her voice, usually steady and controlled, carried an unexpected softness tonight, a vulnerability I had been privileged to earn. I caught myself leaning slightly toward her, drawn not by intent but by an instinctive need to be closer. Then it happened, just a fleeting, unplanned touch. Her fingers brushed mine while she reached for her coffee cup. This time, there was no hesitation, no retreat. The contact lingered, delicate yet deliberate, enough to ignite a quiet, deep warmth. I could feel her presence fully now, the rise and fall of her breathing, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the gentle curve of her profile as she looked at me. Each small gesture was a message, a confession without words. Time seemed to stretch. The outside world, the rain, the streets, the distant hum of cars, faded into nothingness. There was only this room, only the space between us, and the invisible tether forming with every shared glance and touch. In her proximity, I sensed both caution and trust. She wasn't pulling away, she was allowing herself to feel something she had long guarded. I realized, with a quiet intensity, that this was more than a simple connection. It was the culmination of hours, days, weeks of subtle gestures, lingering touches, and careful observation. The locked office had become a sanctuary where emotional and physical intimacy could grow, slowly and deliberately. That night, shoulder to shoulder, fingers brushing, and hearts quietly attuned, we existed in a world apart, a world defined by trust, warmth, and the exhilarating tension of unspoken desire. The moment ended not with declarations, but with an understanding. The closeness between us had shifted irrevocably. The dance of distance and connection had evolved into something profoundly tangible, and the final steps toward what we both quietly hoped for were no longer far away. The office was hushed that night, bathed in the warm glow of a single desk lamp. Outside, the rain had softened into a steady, rhythmic drizzle, casting shimmering reflections on the glass. For weeks, the locked door had been a symbol of restraint, tension, and unspoken feelings. But now, in that quiet, intimate space, it had transformed into something else entirely, a sanctuary, a place where vulnerability and desire could coexist without judgment. She lingered by my side, not across the desk, not commanding, but present. Her shoulder brushed mine, light and accidental, yet deliberate enough to convey what words could not. The subtle warmth of her body, the faint scent of her perfume, and the rise and fall of her breathing filled the space between us. It was a closeness neither of us had fully allowed until now, a careful surrender to the moments we had long resisted. I was afraid, she admitted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Afraid of being judged, of feeling too much. There was a tremor in her tone, a fragile honesty that I had never seen before. Her gaze met mine, steady but vulnerable, and in that instant, all the hesitation, the quiet glances, and lingering touches culminated into a single, undeniable truth: we had crossed the threshold from tension to something deeper, something real. I reached out, letting my hand rest lightly on hers. The touch was deliberate, grounding, and yet gentle, carrying all the words I couldn't say. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers curled slightly around mine, a silent affirmation, a quiet invitation. The locked door, once a barrier, had become a shield, protecting the fragile intimacy that had been growing between us. "Then keep me inside," I whispered back, my voice steady, carrying both reassurance and longing. The words hung in the warm air, heavy with meaning, yet soft enough to respect the delicacy of the moment. She leaned her forehead against my chest, a simple, human gesture that spoke volumes. The steady beat of her heart, the warmth of her presence, the comfort of mutual understanding, all of it pressed gently against me, grounding us in a reality we had both been quietly craving. For the first time, we allowed ourselves to exist fully in that space, free from expectations, free from judgment. The locked office was no longer a cage but a sanctuary, a place where trust, vulnerability, and quiet desire could flourish. And in that stillness, we understood something fundamental. Sometimes the strongest walls are built to protect the most fragile hearts, and sometimes, love finds its way inside, quietly, irrevocably, and beautifully. The night ended not with dramatic gestures or declarations, but with a simple, shared warmth. Arms entwined, fingers brushing, hearts attuned, the story reached its natural, satisfying conclusion. The locked door had opened a world of intimacy, and in that room, nothing else mattered except the fragile, perfect connection we had found together. If this story of unexpected closeness and quiet desire touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more slow-burn romance stories that linger long after the screen fades. And hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that makes your heart pause.